Now, in 2014 alone, well over 1,200 rhinos were killed for material that's essentially the same as this stuff, what's on your nails. Now, that's just a snapshot of a poaching crisis that has decimated rhino and elephant herds right across sub-Saharan Africa. So far, the response from most countries has been to beef up security in game parks, to adopt more aggressive tactics in dealing with poachers, and in the case of some countries like Kenya, to burn ivory stockpiles altogether. Now, all of these approaches, however, deal with poaching and wildlife conservation as a pure criminal problem. Tonight we're asking, is it perhaps time to think about this differently and to look for market-based solutions? Kwame Owino is the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Economic Affairs here in Nairobi. He's with me in studio right now. Mr. Owino, thank you for your time. Let's start perhaps with the broader picture here. Why is it that authorities in East Africa, Kenya in particular, regard poaching as just a pure criminal problem and not an economic one? Doesn't that perception bias make it harder to solve this problem?
Yes, it does, but I think it's understandable partly because, the poachers, many elephants that die and rhinos actually meet gruesome deaths. So that emotional response is one of the things that most governments value speedy responses, and therefore to just ban is very, very easy because either what you do is just pass a law and then say that, look, we're going to do we're going to respond strongly to this menace, as many of them call it, in the hope that that will solve the problem. But that's an incomplete analysis of what the problem is, because part of the reason those deaths occur is because there's very real and strong demand for the ivory on one side and rhino horn on the other.
Indeed, and it also ignores the economic context in which it takes place. But some argue that burning things like ivory, while symbolically strong, it does send quite the message, it doesn't actually solve much, because all it does is diminish the available supply of ivory and pushes up the unit cost per kilogram of the commodity. What do you make of that argument?
That argument is sensible. Actually, it's a strong argument that I believe as well. Partly because when you ban by setting on fire ivory stocks, what you're actually doing is basically a symbolic statement, but you're actually not saving new elephants by virtue of the fact that these are elephants that are already dead, whether killed by poachers or by natural means. So it's a very strong symbolic statement, but I don't think that it affects it affects the incentives of a person who wishes to acquire ivory. As it is in Kenya, I think it's been done on 3 occasions. It's not helped much, in addition to the fact that it's a scientific lie. Setting ivory on fire does not necessarily lead to its consumption. In fact, in many places, it's been suggested that some of that ivory that has been set on fire spectacularly then makes its way to the market because all you do is scrape out the soot. So it's a spectacular lie, but mostly it's pyrotechnics for the purposes of, again, impressing the public.
Indeed. I'm going to use the word farming very loosely here, but let's look at the economic pros and cons of legalizing the trade in ivory and rhino horn. In effect, farming these source animals in order to make sure that you have a relatively steady supply from a fairly consistent population of these animals in order to feed market demand.
Yes. Speaking about rhinos, I'm very, let me say I'm conflicted about rhinos. Whether rhinos can be saved, I think the numbers have gone right down to quite low levels. Whether they can be saved through this mechanism or not is a different matter. But for elephants, I think I'm more convinced it's not necessarily a silver bullet, but actually to farm some of them for the purposes of extraction, reasonable extraction, and plowing that back that money to its conservation is a very sensible thing. And of course, on the other side as well, they can be guarded, or rather they can be protected by other means. But my view is that if all we do is let an elephant stay as standing targets, it's unlikely that there'll be, with the emotional appeal that, look, only elephants should wear ivory, it's unlikely that we'll have them for much longer, because that same strategy and policy, conservation policy response has failed us in the case of rhinos.
Indeed. Finally, though, let me play the devil's argument here. Most individuals have put that argument to respond by saying that legalizing these commodities, ivory and rhino horn, would only serve to push up demand and therefore create this vicious feedback loop where demand for ivory, illegal or legal, tends to go up.
Again, this is not a silver bullet, so basically just legalizing demand is not going to diminish everything. But I think one of the things it's going to do is relative to the illegal market, there'll be an opportunity for those who want to use ivory products to actually get them off the legal market. So what you do is then you squeeze the illegal side of the market, and that might save many more elephants than are saved today. So yes, I think legalization has to be part of the portfolio of policies for conservation on the continent, but specifically in Kenya as well. It's something that must be considered.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you for your input tonight. We've been speaking to Kwame Owino, CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs.